Hello, friends. How's it going? Today is February 22nd, 2024, and you are watching the MMA Eco Live podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Chris Presnell, coming at you live from beautiful, stunning, amazing Portland, Oregon, and kind of kicking myself for not being outside right now, but we got a full summer ahead of us. Anyways, this podcast is solely dedicated to Asian MMA. This YouTube channel, this brand, website, everything, all about Asian MMA. So today I'm going to be going through the Asian MMA schedule for the weekend and then taking any questions that you have. So if you have anything, throw it down in the chat and I'll get to it. Got moderators on standby, so keep it kind and civil. But otherwise, so glad you're with me today. Got a lot going on this weekend. In general, this is just a totally stacked weekend for MMA. A lot of Asian MMA events going down on Saturday in the early morning. And then this is all relative to my time zone, but for us, it's early in the morning on Saturday. And then in the morning to afternoon, it's this PFL Bellator Saudi Arabia card, which should be super interesting. Never really been an MMA event like that before. Of course, we've had lots of co-promoted shows, but I think the context of holding the event in Saudi Arabia, apparently it's going to be outdoors too. Just heard that from Johnny Eblin the other day. And then a lot of weird stuff, interesting storylines going into that PFL Bellator event. And then probably right around the time that concludes, you'll have this UFC Mexico City card starting immediately after that. And I'm really excited for that event because it's basically like a WEC card, which is, flyweight up to and strawweight all the way up to just lightweight. So the action should be really fast paced. I'm really looking forward to this kind of show. I always kind of fantasize about having MMA events where it's just flyweights, bantamweights, featherweights, and we kind of get that with this Mexico City card. So I am really excited for that. But yeah, then we've got RIZIN, got JCK. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, would really appreciate that. Hit a thumbs up on the video, and then we can get going. Basically, tomorrow we've got one Friday fights. Let me share my screen so we can follow the schedule together. Tomorrow, we've got our typical one Friday fight show. And that one just, I believe, not really a whole lot on the way of Asian MMA. I'll get to one championship in their next event in Qatar in just a second. But it'll start Friday night in the US, Saturday everywhere else. We've got this RIZIN Landmark show. And the card took a couple hits, but one fight I am really excited about is Saori Oshima fighting Claire Lopez. That should be a really fun, fast-paced fight. Really enjoy watching both fighters. Always a pleasure to see Saori Oshima and how she kind of fits into the bigger Asian MMA picture, especially fighting. I'm glad that she's getting more fights with RIZIN and getting a little bit bigger of a profile, as opposed to just fighting on smaller, not small, but smaller Japanese promotions. Honestly, fighting at microweight, your options are pretty limited in the international scheme of things. So she is going up to atom weight, fighting Claire Lopez on pretty short notice, I would say. Main event there, you've got Yoshinori Hori, a UFC veteran, fighting Luis Gustavo. Also on the card, you got another UFC veteran, Daichi Abe is on there. Shohei Nose, Road to UFC veteran, two-time Road to UFC veteran. And yeah, he's fighting Kenta Takizawa. So, kind of a fight night feel for this RIZIN Landmark show. One thing of note on this RIZIN card is that if you're outside of Japan, it's going to air on RIZIN TV, RIZIN.tv, which I've got the link here on the website. This, I got to hand it to RIZIN for wanting to be more and more accessible, more easy to follow, watching previous fights. RIZIN announced this week that they are going to, for everything outside of Japan, going through this RIZIN.tv website. Previously, it was on Triller TV, an app and website. And now I wasn't sure how widely available Triller TV is, but this site, from the looks of it, is available just about everywhere. So that's great. It's also going to have the backlog of RIZIN fights on this site, and they have said that there's going to be some kind of subscription available where I'm guessing you get access to every live RIZIN event and also their whole catalog. So that'll be great. Definitely a lot of MMA fans, I think, will be really interested in that, especially the backlog of fights. I think usually they would just put a lot of those fights on YouTube after the fact, but I think this is a great option for them. They've got enough history and enough interest, I think, to be able to have their own site with their own catalog. So that'll be definitely something I'll look into. Those first 5 fights airing on YouTube starting at 7:30 Pacific. Now let's go to this PFL and Bellator show. There's really only, Middle Eastern area is not typically an area I usually cover, and for the most part, not really any Asian fighters. Plenty of interesting fights on this card for sure. But I typically on this podcast usually stick to the Asian fighters. And there is one fighter, the second fight on the prelims, Edukondal Rao, is an Indian fighter. And from what I know of him, he's mostly just fought on smaller shows in India. Not a lot of big fights for him. So I'm glad that he could get this fight with PFL. Love that, or PFL Bellator. I don't know what he's technically fighting under, but he is 4-1, fights at lightweight, and he is recently, just fought for some. I've just pulled up his profile. Recently fought for some Indian local promotions, and then he did just fight his last fight in Matrix Fight Night. That was last July. He did lose a unanimous decision to a guy that had no fights on his record. So the jury is out if how good he actually is, but he's fighting a guy in Abdullah Al-Khatani. This seems like it might be a little bit of a mismatch. Al-Khatani, I've heard his name thrown around there in prospect circles. He is 7-1. So I don't know. This seems like a little bit of a mismatch to me. I wish that they would have given Edu, and here on Tapology it says we've got his name as Edukondal Rao. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. This may not be a great night for the Indian, but anything can happen, right? Let's look at Naiza as well. Let me scroll up here. Naiza has an interesting card going down this Saturday from Almaty. First of all, they're in the Almaty Arena, which I can't remember if they've been there before, but that is a bigger size arena, I think around 12,000 seats. In the main event, you've got Jalgis Jumagulov making a return against the most random, but also against a guy that gets around. I'll say that. Cleveland McLean, who fights all around the U.S. and also all around the world now. They've brought him into Naiza to fight Jalgis Jumagulov. It should be a really exciting fight. Not really sure what Jumagulov's goals are at this point in his career, being now in his upper 30s. He may just want to fight as many times as he can in his home country, and just he can get that main event slot anytime he wants with local Kazakh promotions. So he may just be in a stage where he's just wanting to enjoy himself, not necessarily try to fight the best possible names, but put on entertaining fights for his home Kazakh population. So you have that Jumabekov, really popular fighter and boxer, fighting Vanderlei Jr., who is an Ailash Pride FC champion. Kind of a cool fight that got put together on late notice there. Vanderlei Jr. also was slotted into that Ailash Pride FC title fight on late notice as well. So this is now 2 short notice fights that he's taken, pretty big ones in Kazakhstan, and he's shown that he can make the best out of those opportunities. So, but the fight that I'm definitely looking at the most is that third from the top Tailaka Nuaraji fighting Douglas Hibero. Not really sure how to say that. But Hibero has fought for Naiza and won before. Has fought some pretty good fighters in Naiza. So this is an excellent test for Tailaka. And if he wins this fight, I mentioned this in the Road to UFC roster video that I just put out today. But I think if Nuaraji wins this fight, he could go to UFC, or I would say more likely put him in a non-tournament fight in Road to UFC. I matched him up with a Korean fighter like Ko Suk-hyun for Road to UFC in a non-tournament fight, and I think that should be his last barrier before getting into the UFC. But Douglas Hibero, obviously a good grappler, has a lot more fights than Tailaka, so I think that should be a really perfect test for him, and excited for him that he gets to compete in his native country of Kazakhstan. Other than that, the other Asian MMA that we've got this weekend, or actually let me hit this one first. AFC 30 going down in Vietnam, and not a whole lot of, I would say, like top Korean prospects on the menu. Song Hyun Jong, undefeated Korean fighter, is in the main event against Pablo Eduardo. You've got also Felipe Negochadle, who is a champion with Lion Championship. That's right. He and Eduardo are two Brazilian guys that live and train out of Vietnam. But otherwise, Choi Han Gil, a guy who trains out of Korean Zombie MMA, he is on the card against a Japanese guy, Yuto Aragati. But that'll come your way on the AFC YouTube channel. And then on Sunday, really interesting, unique event in Mixed Fight 55, which is a collab with JCK. Overall, I think they did an excellent job bringing a lot of good fighters over from JCK, a lot of either prospects in the making, some longtime veterans, and also some just top-level prospects overall. The two guys that I definitely will be watching, Aping Shala and Naratai Kazabai, Chinese Kazakh, and then Aping Shala is of the E ethnic minority. And JCK is really he's a homegrown JCK fighter, really kind of starting from the bottom, and then took 2 losses in some fights where they matched him up against some more top contender kind of guys. Lost those 2, but then rebounded well. So he's, I think, a good prospect. Figuring out weight has been an issue for him, and but he's got some really good hands. That's what I like watching from Aping Shala. Jong Yu He has been training in Thailand for a little while. I've also got Tsai Shongshong, another guy training in Thailand. Zhou Qiang could be a good prospect. And then you've got some veterans in Wuta and Bida Lia, and also Asur Kerbai, Jinensa Bieka, Road to UFC alum, fighting as well. So overall, a good selection of Chinese fighters that JCK was able to round up to send to Armenia. Interested to see how this night unfolds. I don't really have a good gauge on where a lot of these Armenian fighters are, what their skill level is, or just Armenian MMA as a whole. So will be kind of a surprise to me how these fights go. I don't, I'm hesitant to tell you to tune into UFC Fight Pass for this, because on the one side, both Mixed Fight and JCK have been advertising that the event would be shown on UFC Fight Pass. And I've been checking them like every day to be like, hey, still happening? Okay. Yeah. In fact, I'm just hopping on there now to make sure that we're still good for UFC Fight Pass. Yeah. It says UFC Fight Pass. So, but the only reason I hesitate is because it's not on the Fight Pass schedule right now. Always makes me nervous. But I'm guessing if something were to happen and it wouldn't be on Fight Pass, they would just throw it up on YouTube. So yeah, I just hopping on to Fight Pass now, and no Mixed Fight or JCK coming up in the near future. So we'll just see what happens, right? Oh boy. All right. Oh, there's one more event I wanted to tell you guys. I don't have it on my schedule, which is a mistake on my part. But there is an event going down tomorrow from Tachung, which is a city in Xinjiang province in China. Really random event, kind of a one-off cultural event, but this is going down in a city in Xinjiang province. And why it's important is because they have brought over Batebol and Darmisi Jawupasi to Xinjiang province to fight. Now, it's a very, should I say, low-level Chinese kind of event where they are putting a lot of these fighters against, I would say, highly overmatched foreign competition. You see this a lot of times in China. They'll get a lot of Chinese fighters, put them against a bunch of foreign fighters that are way overmatched as a way to kind of flex Chinese power, get people wins. I'm not too happy about it. They've put these two guys, Batebol and Darmisi, against two Iranian guys that have no business being there, in my opinion. But there you go. On the flip side, like thinking about Road to UFC, both of those guys are coming off. Well, I guess Batebol won by DQ. He had a terrible Road to UFC season, didn't he? He won by DQ in the first Road to UFC round against Kiwon Bean. Then he misses weight to fight Shin Haraguchi in the semifinal round, gets replaced by Park Jae-hyun. So not a great season for Batebol. And for Darmisi, he fought he fought Lee Chong-ho in the semifinal round, ultimately kind of just gassed out and got beat in the I believe that was the second round. So to get on to Road to UFC Season 3, I'm sure both of these guys, if they really wanted to be in it, could be in it, but the requirements do say that you can't be coming off a loss. So I feel like I've actually seen a lot of fighters, Asian fighters that were in the season last year, taking some weird, like easy fights. Like you saw Lee Jung-hyun fight in Road FC against a guy who was like 1-1, right? So part of me wonders if they're just trying to get a win under their belt just to officially kind of pad their record in their favor, not take a lot of damage, and set themselves up to make a run in the third season. I don't know if I'm right on that, but that's what it kind of looks like to me. A very strange fight. I have no idea how this event is airing tomorrow in Tachung. I'll check I'll check Chinese social media before I go to bed to see if it's airing on Douyin or something. That would be my first guess. And then tomorrow morning, if I don't find out, I'll try to wake up and see if I can find some kind of broadcast, because I get the feeling that if I don't like record this broadcast as it's airing live, I may not probably the top two fights, Batepol and Darmisi, but otherwise may never find the results of this fight if I don't like tape the live broadcast. So I'll try to do that. All right. Other Asian MMA news. I thought it was interesting that it was Nick Atkin who tweeted this, although it was technically South China Morning Post that posted it first, that Stamp Fairtex versus Denise Zamboanga is off of the 166 pay-per-view card in Qatar next week. At the same time, the grappling title fight between Tai Rutolo and Isaac Mitchell is also off. So we were promised 5 title fights, and now we're down to just 3, those being 3 MMA rematches: Rainier de Ritter versus Anatoly Malikin, Tong Kai versus Ton Lei, and Joshua Pasio versus Jared Brooks. So very interesting situation we find ourselves in. I have no idea why Stamp Fairtex versus Denise Zamboanga why it was called off. Nick Atkins said that it had been off for a while. So I don't know. I don't know if it was an injury. I didn't do any looking into that at all. If it was an injury to either fighter or a travel related issue. I did always feel like it was kind of a strange fight to put on a fight in Qatar, a fight between a girl from Thailand and a girl from the Philippines. in the middle and putting that fight in the Middle East. In a not huge arena, there's not going to be a huge like pop for Stamp Fairtex. So I always thought that was a little bit strange. It may have been a situation where they were really trying to make sure that they stacked the deck with 5 title fights. That's always what they had been talking about with the Qatar show. So, yeah, I heard also that from Nick that could be pushed back to June. So very interesting. With a timeline being pushed back to June, that makes me think it was something maybe more injury related, but that's all speculation. I have no idea why that fight was pushed off, but this event in Qatar, I mean, it could end up being, honestly, like, especially the Tongkai Tonlé fight, even though we just saw that fight, as well as the Rainier de Ritter versus Anatoly Malikin fight. We just saw that fight too. But both of those fights, I expect at least should be action-packed. One could be a blowout. One could be a repeat of what we already saw. But they should at least be engaging fights. Pasio versus Brooks, I also think that should probably go the exact same way we just saw it. But maybe not. I don't know. I'm not saying the card won't be entertaining, but it has taken some hits, and I did see that they were giving out free tickets for this show. So they're really trying to pack it out, but yeah, it's a tough place to be in. I think like trying to deliver this mega card of mega cards for one championship, it's hard. And honestly, like we saw UFC struggle with this with UFC 300 too, right? Like, they had this opportunity coming up in the future where the date, it was originally, one was trying to hold this in December. They didn't feel like they could put on a big enough show at that time, so they pushed it back to March. But, I'm not just picking on one championship here. UFC also kind of struggled with UFC 300, even though I give that card, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. We still could get another fight on that card. I'm definitely not complaining about the card, but like it wasn't ultimately like the biggest, baddest card in terms of like star power, right? And I think, it is hard to make all the stars align. Even when you do have a date in the distant future. So, unfortunate for one championship, it probably isn't going to be the just like mega event that they always planned for Qatar. I don't know how that affects things in Qatar going forward. I've heard mixed reports about their relationship with the Qataris. Some people say that it's a bad relationship, that the Qataris are really disappointed and embarrassed by one championship. Chatri Situdong would tell you the exact opposite. Either way, yeah, not sure how this affects their relationship with them going forward. But so that's one bit of Asian MMA news. I covered RIZIN. Let's get into your questions. The wrong view of eating. What? Wow, that's a weird one, Rain. That is a weird one. Fighting is about questions and answers, as Ghost used to tell us about at WMMA Mania. I don't think, I feel like, am I always misunderstanding questions? Maybe I am. Is it easier to be the question? Like Khabib is always asking the question to his opponents with his wrestling, or is it easier to be the answer? Like Whaley and Leon Edwards, where they take away the opponent's A game. I think I understood your question last week. If you're asking, is it easier to impose a certain style, or is it easier to adapt to an opponent? I think it is. I think both at the elite level are extremely difficult. However, I think that adapting your style, like last week, I talked about the funnel, making everyone play your game, fight your fight. I think that ultimately is the easier of the two options, because it only requires that you set the guardrails for the sides of the funnel, that you use your defenses to basically make people play your game. But obviously, none of those are easy. And to be able to allow someone to force someone to stay in your world in striking, that forces you to have good takedown defense, good footwork, good cage work, all of those things. So definitely none, I would say, is easier than the other. Get right to the question. Have I seen Josh Quinlan's Tapology page? He seems to have the strangest career. While I'm on Tapology, let's just look at that. I wouldn't say I've looked at it in detail. His last 6 contests. So for Josh Quinlan, before he fought in Contender Series, he had fought 3 times for LFA, once against an opponent that was 3-1, once against a 6-3 opponent. So yeah, not necessarily the most experience. And then he, in 2021, you're right. So his last couple fights, his last 4 fights, Contender Series win, overturned to a no contest for a failed drug test. Then he knocks out Jason Witt in his UFC debut, and then loses 2 fights right after that. One to Trey Waters by decision, one to Danny Barlow last weekend by 3rd round TKO. And then he had a fight canceled. I mean, I've seen some pretty weird Tapology pages. I probably spend about 2 to 3 hours on Tapology every day. That's not true. A lot. I spend a lot of time on Tapology. I've seen some pretty weird ones. I mean, you want to talk about like Ray Borg. You want to talk about who is the other guy? Well, like Edgar Chairez, right? Or that whole saga. A lot of weird stuff there. But yeah, Ray Borg is definitely one of the weirdest ones that I've ever seen. There's those fighters that just like either can't make weight, keep getting injured, have like, concussion symptoms, everything in between. But yeah, for a fighter that young, he has had a really weird career with Zuffa. I honestly, like, he got fast tracked to the UFC pretty quickly, right? I mean, he had only fought 2 fighters with more than 1 fight on their record before fighting on Contender Series. So he definitely got fast tracked. Does the definition of well-rounded change from era to era? Jack Slack said that at the time Frank Shamrock was really, really well-rounded, but wouldn't be today since he only had 1 punch that he liked, a kick, and wrestling. Now we consider well-rounded are fighters like Volkanovski, Leon Edwards, Wei Li, Islam Makhachev, to an extent, who are multifaceted threats. Do I think 10 years from now the definition of well-rounded will change? Like, will the fighters I mentioned no longer be considered well-rounded 10 years from now, as in the future, fighters will do things that the current well-rounded ones are not? It's a good question. I don't know if I can really predict where MMA skill is going right now. So Frank Shamrock, he was like, what, 25 years ago, 20 years ago? Whereas, like, I'm trying to think through, like, 10 years ago, what did we consider well-rounded? It seemed like there was just like the different kinds of striking styles that you could have were just a lot less. It just seems like we've filled out a lot more gaps, and there's been a lot of evolution of like adding in switch stances, calf kicks, a lot of development with footwork, cage work, submission. I mean, the jiu-jitsu game, it feels like, is always changing too. So I think, it's always a moving target. And when we develop in one way, eventually we develop ways to defend against it. And then so those developments aren't as effective. So it's always kind of this moving target. In term, that's an interesting question. I would say, I think our definition of well-rounded will mostly stay the same 10 years from now. However, there's probably going to be new wrinkles that fighters have figured out that are that will change the way the game looks. But I think in terms of being well-rounded, I wonder if you'll see fighters that are more and more adept at finishing fights in multiple different areas instead of only being able to dictate the pace and conversation of a fight. I don't know. That's a good question. I have to think about that. So you're asking about rage bait. I think that's more about the internet as a whole. I think, and again, I feel like I kind of touch on this about every other week, but the age of the internet that we're living in right now, it partially exists because we created it and we consume it. So, I think if there's an era of the internet, or if there's a side of the internet that you don't like, I would say just like don't consume it, or find a way to block it or whatever. But for me, I don't see a whole lot of that on my timelines, mostly because I don't follow those accounts, or if I do, I just skim past them. But it definitely is a big thing, and I feel like I kind of touch on that, kind of the sensationalism of a lot of the age of internet that we're in right now. But yeah, I didn't see that, but I think that's kind of just where we're at on the internet. Don't I think the UFC will avoid giving Road to UFC shots to guys that didn't have stellar runs in Road to UFC? Guys like Lee Kai-Win and Shia Bean. Yeah, I really, so if you haven't watched already, just in the early hours this morning, I dropped my newest video, which is a Road to UFC roster for season 3. Totally speculation from me, but if I could fill it out, and on the featherweight roster, I put Shia Bean on there, and I also put Lee Kai-Win. Lee Kai-Win I put on there because Lee Kai-Win overall, I know his fight against Koya Konda was not exciting, but overall, he does have an exciting style. He does have an exciting persona, and he has a lot of pretty good high-level experience in his career. He's been in the UFC PI system, so I think that at the very least, he is one win away or one fight away from being back in Road to UFC. I mentioned that I kind of struggled whether or not he should be included, just because his win percentage, he's 12-6, and the requirements for Road to UFC is to have a 70% win to loss ratio. So that would put him at like 2/3 of his fights that he's won. So that'd be just under that percentage. But just because he does have the history that he does, and he did make it to the finals as well, so I think he could make it. For Shia Bean, he came off a pretty decent win where he fought at One Pride MMA. Is that right? One Pride. They brought him over to Indonesia. So I think that they could give him a shot. And he's been pretty quiet recently, although I saw that he is at Bong Tao in Phuket. So, but yeah, guys, he is on a 3-fight. No, I was totally wrong about that. He's won 3 fights since his last Road to UFC appearance. He fought Anga Hans, another Road to UFC vet. He randomly fought some random guy at the Liangshan Torch Festival, and then he fought Jung Hong-guk in a fight at WLF when they brought in the Korean fighter. So he's 3-0, and he's won 2 of those by TKO, 1 by decision. I think he's a top candidate for Road to UFC. Lee Kai-Win, I would say, is a little bit more right on the line. Announcing fights before they're finalized is really unprofessional by the UFC. Absolutely. So why does Dana get mad when journalists report on fights that they themselves have not finalized but announced? I know. This is what really irritates me. Earlier this week, if I like started tweeting about it because I was mad, and then I realized that it wasn't worth getting into on Twitter, so I deleted the tweet. But I saw that Dana was mad about Israel Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev being posted as the main event for the Saudi Arabia show on June 22nd. And when I did some digging into that, the source of that rumor was that an aggregate site. It was really hard to tell, because if you search the Kingdom Arena in Saudi Arabia on Google, this Russian site, is the second result that comes up. And I had a hard time finding where tickets were sold on the first option. So this option where this Russian site posted a picture, a graphic of Chimaev versus Adesanya for that event. So I could totally see why someone would believe that if it's selling tickets for the event. And if the site is advertising a concert, headlining act of a concert, you're not going to second guess that. So I thought that was really strange. And of course, Dana uses it's the media's fault. And really, like, pretty much no high quality media sites posted the fight. None of them took the bait. None of them posted that. It's not the media's fault. The only site that did post it was Yahoo Sports, which I would not even say is like I don't feel like I've never once gone to yahoosports.com. I've never, that's just me personally, but like, that was where Kevin Iole used to work, who's Dana's buddy. He's no longer there. They've laid off a lot of their sports staff. So I would not look to Yahoo Sports as like a leader in the MMA news source of things. But it was unfortunate that he blamed the media on that. That really frustrated me because that is like what is driving so much of the like anti-media push, is people in power blaming things that are not the media's fault, blaming them on the media, or even scapegoating their own faults on the media. My hunch is, and this has been confirmed, but the practice of the UFC of announcing fights that are not 100% goes way before this year. Probably has always been going on in some regard, but for some reason, maybe they've just been doing it a little bit more often this year. All of the things that Dana White complains about the media, he does them himself. Clickbait, announcing things that aren't official, all of that. So it's frustrating. And then he complains about how much he hates doing podcasts, but then goes on podcasts. He mentions how much he hates scrums and interviews with the media, but then he keeps doing them. So I don't know. It's really odd and frustrating, honestly. And I get that. It is frustrating when media announce fights that actually aren't official, or it's frustrating when the media announces that a fight is in the works, and then a lot of other sites change the meaning to something different. Fight is official, fight is signed, this or that. That I also totally understand. Last year, first of all, my record with announcing fights was 100%. I'd announced a lot of fights, UFC fights, a lot in between. I'd broken a lot of fights, and the one last fall, I announced the Song Yadong versus Peter Yan fight, and I announced that it was in the works. I did not say that it was official. I announced that it was in the works. However, that did not end up panning out, and even though I felt like I covered myself by saying it was in the works, I do feel like I, like, if I'm just being honest, I cut some corners, and I was really shooken up by that. I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but for me, like, I really take seriously my credibility and my trustworthiness. So like I have not, if you've noticed, like I have not broken very many fights recently. And honestly, that for me, I'm trying to make a little bit more space for myself because I want to do everything I can to not be a media site that puts out crap. I never want to be that. I want to have the reputation that the guys that you look up to most, that you trust most, I want to aim for that kind of reputation. So currently I'm like really trying to focus on learning just more about the whole journalistic experience, trying to learn from different people that have been not just in the media, MMA media or sports media, but just the overall journalistic scope of things, watching lectures, listening to podcasts, things like that, trying to just like, learn the game, I guess, and learn how to be professional because I don't want to be part of the problem. I can't complain about it, but then be part of the problem. So I think for me, like, and I kind of have a vision of like, yeah, there's a really big problem. And again, a lot of this goes with just the age of the internet that we're in right now. And there's just such a big problem of quality control in media in general. And I don't know what it's going to take to fix that. I don't know what we need to do. I don't know if there's anything we can do. If you're someone that regularly and reputably reports fights, a lot of your trust can get eaten away just by the fact that there's so many pretenders and people that do this sloppily and cut corners on different things. Like your reputation is going to take a hit from that. So I sometimes just kind of think about like, what can we do to try to manage that or create journalistic resources more readily available for people that want to break fights, but have no journalistic training, just have an Instagram account. How can we, as media members, and I've been in this for 3 years, which is longer than a lot, but still kind of like, I mean, I was talking to Drake Riggs and he was like, yeah, I was 8 years before I went into this full time. It's like, okay, there's an expectation, but yeah, I think a lot about what we can do to raise the quality of MMA media in like a reporting journalistic sense. And in some ways, I don't think we can do anything because social media is so accessible. It just kind of comes with the territory. But I understand the frustration that people have when fake things are put out there or partially true things are put out there. But I also am like, well, Daniel, you're also part of the problem. Whoops. So is there such thing as a fighter who struggles to finish fights, even though they have great power in their hands? Like, is Gray Maynard a good example of that? What would you call that syndrome? I would say that could be matchmaking. You just end up getting matched up with a lot of guys like Frankie Edgar in his prime, who is just really hard to put away. It could be that. I think also, it's interesting too. Like you think about someone like Holly Holm, who is a championship level boxer who added really, like when Holly Holm got signed to the UFC, her big thing was head kicks. She had several head kick KOs on her resume. And she, believe it or not, when she came to the UFC, she was seen as like a killer. And then she fought Ronda Rousey and just annihilated her. And that was like the reputation that she had, was like a knockout artist. And then she also has that KO win over Betch Correia. But I don't know if she doesn't have a whole lot of other finishes in the UFC. Now she kind of has the reputation as just kind of a little bit of like a pitter patter kind of fighter. I don't know what the story is behind that. If it's matchmaking, if it's a loss of technique. I don't know what the story is there, but somewhere I feel like Holly Holm does have some kind of like KO power. But I don't know where it went. I don't know why she hasn't been able to get those finishes. It could be, and then this is for anybody. It could be confidence. It could be something mental going on. A lot of times you see fighters as they fight longer and longer, they get more hesitant, a little more gun shy, more measured, less willing to take risks the older that they get. Kind of saw that with George St. Pierre a little bit, even though he was pretty dominant in his whole career. As it went on, you saw him get a lot more measured. He relied a lot more on his wrestling, even though his striking, that Kyokushin karate style, was kind of what got him into MMA. So I think that's part of it. Fighters are less willing to just rely on the brute force of an aggressive style of striking, and they become a little bit more measured. It's the best answer I would have for that. Is there a way to watch Bate Bull and Jau Pasi fight? My best guess would be on Douyin, but I don't even know what channel that would be on, because this is one of those weird Chinese events that it's kind of just like, it's like put on by the cultural administration of that city or province rather than a promotion. So I don't know where to find it. I'll see if I can, like I said, later this evening, I'll try to do some digging through WeChat to see if anything's been posted. I follow both of those guys on WeChat, so I'll see if they've posted anything as well. As you know, California Commission released payouts, and a reported by a reputable source from the LA Times. Well, if it's released, then it wouldn't even have to be through like a journalist, right? There was this independent journalist who calls himself a fight analyst that was bragging that his estimates that he wrote on an article were close to the payouts that reported by the LA Times. Yeah, I did see that. What do I think of releasing fake payouts than saying that you were close? Does that hurt the sport? I don't feel like you should release payouts unless they're public, is how I feel about that. Kind of goes back to the whole credibility, quality control conversation. But if because yeah, California wonderfully releases payouts, as every single commission everywhere should. Which I was a little bit confused why it was just through this one guy. But yeah, feel like every commission should. And I feel like that was kind of weird, because it wasn't like I don't know, unless that guy that you're talking about had a source within the commission. It's pretty, I don't know. Fighter payouts can definitely, that influences a lot in the sport. So, yeah, I do think it kind of hurts the sport a little bit. Sammy saying, can I try to segment MMA media and MMA fan base and see if you agree? Great journalists like yourself, John Nash, Drake Riggs, and Aaron Bronstetter, very professional when covering the sport. Analysts like chat favorite Ghost, Jack Slatt, Dan Tom Heavy Hands, Miguel Class, Ryan Wag, very knowledgeable in techniques and how they work, but are sarcastic and find the sport silly and make it a comedy. Bad journalists that just twist words for clickbait and make fighters look bad. And I wouldn't even call them journalists. I would just call them media members or media personalities. Content creators, or content creator would be another to say it. Just say things to get engagement. Is this the state of MMA? Yeah, and I would guess it's probably similar with other sports too, although there may not be as much of a problem of quality control. But with YouTube and social media being a thing, there are people that work for ESPN, and then there's everything in between that and a fan base. So I think you're going to get that with every single sport. But yeah, I mean, engagement engagement bait is all over the internet, not just MMA. It's yeah, I mean, my YouTube is filled with it. But you know, the thing about engagement bait is we live in an attention economy, right? Everything on our world is all about attention. When you pick up your phone, everything on your phone is screaming to try to get your attention. So all of us that are creating content to be consumed and enjoyed by others, like, we're fighting for your attention. So there has to be a way, we have to try to get your attention. So there's that side of it, but I think and I feel like I've tried to like walk this line as close as I can to, if I'm going to like use strong methods to try to get your attention, I want the payoff to meet or exceed those efforts. I think as long as you're doing that, you're fine. But I think it's fine for people to noticeably try really hard to get your attention, as long as like what you're bringing people to meets that. Any idea when Road to UFC contestants will be announced? I heard that it'll be late March when they are going to try to make decisions. So I think probably early April will be when you start hearing some things. And I think, you know, late March, they started getting, they put the call out for applications early February, even like maybe even before Road to UFC season 2, before those finals fights had aired. I think that's a good idea. It's got a really long window because there's a lot of fighters that have fights between now and, I mean, you even got some of those Indonesian guys have fights on April 20th already. So yeah, there's a lot of fights that still have to happen between now and May. So give fighters plenty of time to have those fights, have time to hopefully have a full training camp. So end of March and then hopefully beginning of April. Read the whole thing before reacting. Why do MMA media like Sean Al-Shadi keep saying that all Dern needs is wrestling? She got an early takedown against Lemos with time and still couldn't sub her. Maybe it's time for everyone to admit that no matter what she does, that Dern is, yeah. A lot with Dern here. Yeah, a lot of, you're asking about wrestling. I mean, it's been a problem for her, right? I think there's a little bit of a blueprint out there with fighters like Ryan Hall and Damian Maia, where you have these elite level, and even like Gary Tonin as well in one championship, and Buchecha, these elite level fighters that are coming from the jiu-jitsu world, that for them, really, it's like if they can just get the fight to the ground, then they can win most fights. They can submit most opponents. Like, very few opponents are going to be able to go toe to toe with Mackenzie Dern on the ground. That much is true. And for Mackenzie Dern, like, it is true that she has really struggled to have a high success rate with takedowns. For Damian Maia, Maia and Ryan Hall, and I would say Maia was even a little bit, like, Damian Maia fought for a long time at the elite level at welterweight and a little bit at middleweight too. But he eventually was so freaking good at avoiding, and like he had like multiple fights where he did not absorb a single strike and he didn't throw a single strike, but he was able to avoid anything on the feet and get the fight to the mat and get the submission relatively quickly. So I think when people are kind of making those comments for Dern about all she needs is wrestling, I think they're projecting a little bit of those ambitions and what they've seen from high level jiu-jitsu fighters like that. And we saw a little bit of this crash and burn as well with Crone Gracie, right? When he fought, was it Pat Sabatini last year in Newark, we saw that where he just kind of got into the like flopping phase of the fight, where he was just kind of flopping onto his back and showed how like ill prepared he was to fight elite MMA fighters. So it may be that we've reached a point in MMA development, and this almost kind of ties back to one of the first questions about being well-rounded, is like, if Damian Maia were to make his UFC debut today, would he still? I don't know. He last fought, what was that? He fought in Singapore against Ben Askren in 21, I want to say. That might have been his last fight. Or no, that was 2019. Either way, I'm not sure if they would still be successful, but I think when people are talking about Mackenzie Dern like that, I think they are kind of putting her in that category of other elite level grapplers that have transitioned to MMA, hoping that she doesn't need to be Alex Pereira on the feet. She doesn't need to be the best striker. If she can just find a way to close distance and get things to the ground as soon as possible, have a high success rate with the takedowns, which she traditionally has not had. It's been, I would guess, probably somewhere around 50-50. Then she could bring the fight to her world really reliable. It's just that I think by now things have evolved a little bit more, and fighters are getting better at getting back to their feet, better takedown defense. So I think the conversation is a little bit more complex than that, like you've indicated. But I think when people say that, that's kind of what they're hoping for out of Mackenzie Dern. I don't know. It's like if she could, I don't know if she's ever linked up with Damian Maia or some of those minds where, but I think there is a world out there where Dern could follow that path. I don't know if it's available to her, whether in coaching or in the way that she wants to fight, but I think an attempt at that path is available. She attempts to strike, I think, more than she needs to sometimes, and that ends up costing her a lot. How does one make money if they're giving out free tickets? Well, they've burned through $500 million in cash, so I wouldn't exactly say they're making money. It's interesting because I wonder if we are in an era of mixed martial arts at the elite level. Definitely not at the lower levels, but at the elite level. Elite meaning like UFC 1, PFL, where ticket sales and gate are really maybe a little bit of an afterthought for promotions. And here's what I mean by that. We've seen the UFC go to the UFC Apex, once or twice a month, it seems, ever since the pandemic started. And it feels like that may never change. By 2024, you would have thought that would have changed, but here we are. It hasn't changed. At the same time, you're seeing the UFC signing more and more, site fees, or receive more and more site fees from big cities around the world, like New York City, like Salt Lake City. Apparently, they're going to head back to Salt Lake City this summer again. They went for the last 2 summers. Meanwhile, there's tons of places around the world that are starving for a UFC event. But it's all about the site fee. Going to Florida, they signed a site fee with Anaheim, with the Honda Center, to go 3 times in the next 5 years. They have a deal with Abu Dhabi. They've got a deal with Sydney, Australia. And so it seems like the UFC is wanting to make more money they're thinking more in terms of where are all the cities that we can sign site fees with that are really lucrative, and then just kind of rotate between those places, rather than just like, hey, Omaha, Nebraska hasn't had an event for a while. I bet we could sell out the, what's that? Is that the Cox Convention Center? I went there years ago for a UFC event. But we haven't been there in a long time. I bet we could sell out 6,000 seats at the Cox Convention Center in the middle of the Midwest. Or would they rather sign a $20 million site fee somewhere else? And then, also like the broadcast deals are a big thing too, which is kind of factors into the whole like UFC Apex thing as well, why they're not choosing to go on the road. So I wonder if we are entering an era where like higher level promotions aren't going to care as much about how much money they can make on tickets as much as those other things, media rights and site fees. So for one, one would love to sell out the biggest arenas possible and sell every ticket. But for them, it's almost like more important to have a relationship with the Qataris and create an event that creates a lot of buzz. I think is more important for Qatar. It's all about tourism, driving tourism to Qatar. Obviously, if they're having shows in Qatar once a year, twice a year, and they're consistently only selling 1,000 seats, then they may want to reevaluate the conversation. But that's kind of how I feel. Like one championship is not going to get back in the black because they're able to sell out 6,000 seat arenas around the world, especially in like Southeast Asia. Singapore is a little bit of an exception. You can probably make a little bit wealthier of an overall economy in Singapore, but yeah. So, and on the one sense, I feel like it probably doesn't bother them too much. And PFL, I'm guessing, probably won't sell a ton of seats for their Saudi Arabia show either. I'm not totally sure what the capacity is. If it's going to be held outdoors, then I'm not really sure what that is going to be like. I thought the Kingdom Arena was an indoor arena, at least it was for the Ngannou Fury fight. Yeah, so I think you're seeing a lot of those things change in the sports, like the live sporting world, is that shift. Either way, though, it's not a good sign, and it definitely is like really frustrating. Like the same thing for the Colorado show. This is what's interesting is they held an event. One championship held an event at the First Bank Arena in Broomfield, Colorado last year, and 6,000 seat arena. Someone within one of my contacts who's pretty high up in a big promotion told me that they had only sold like a couple hundred tickets for that show and then gave away the rest. And then they reported it as a sellout. So I think that is what's frustrating to me is when we're calling a sellout, giving away most of the tickets for free. And I don't know, my friend, I don't know how correct he was, but it does track with what they've done before with giving away a lot of tickets. But it's all about the appearance. It's about the buzz. Like you don't want an empty arena. You don't want to feel like you're fighting in the UFC Apex. You want a massive arena. You want people that look like they're having a good time. That is part of the relationship with Qatar, is panning to fans in the I forget, is it Lusail Sports Arena, the one in Doha, Qatar, panning to all these fans that are just going crazy. So that is what the Qataris really want, is they want to, boost that sports experience. So in a way, I feel like it's a little bit give and take. The Qataris, what's most important is that it looks like it's a big event. Selling every single ticket, I don't know if that's as big for one championship. Just a moment. I actually need to plug one thing in real quick. Apologies for that. Speaking of UFC 300, I've seen on Reddit, most of the people are angry that Weili is co-main eventing that. Don't they remember that she has co-main evented multiple pay-per-views? What is different about 300? Well, I mean, to be fair, it's UFC 300. Hey, am I mad that two Chinese fighters are the co-main event of UFC 300? Hell no. I love it. I couldn't be more excited. It's the fight that I'm most excited for on the whole card. That I have no problem with that. You have no problem with that. But I do understand. So, like, here's the thing. If this was UFC 301, 302, even 299, like nobody would care about this. People would be pumped. Everyone would be saying 10 out of 10 card, this and that. The UFC 300 thing, even if you're not having, I've said UFC 300 never needed a weird, wacky fight featuring the return of a fighter that was kind of retired or out of their prime. I've never thought that. Even like a Nate Diaz, I've never thought, that's what I want out of 300. But I at least wanted fights that, like, thinking of like what are the actual biggest fights of that the UFC could put together. They're John Jones versus Tom Aspinall. They're Israel Adesanya versus DDP. They're Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler, or even, Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 3. Gaethje versus Makhachev. I'll even throw in there Pantoja versus Horiguchi, even though that's a little bit more of a fight for the hardcores. But any of those like really big fights that are on the menu, I think like this isn't even the like rabbit out of the hat thing. I think most of us were really, or even say like a Khamzat Chimaev versus DDP, something like that. All of those fights are potential fights that we could get from now until the end of the year. Like those aren't wacky, weird fights. And I would argue a lot of those fights, maybe except the Chimaev fight, are the fights that we should get next in all of those weight classes and for all of those fighters. But we didn't get any of those fights, any of the like really big fights that people are talking about. And so the frustration with UFC 300 is that none of those big fights that that like the broadest circle of MMA fans are talking about are at UFC 300. And it's like, I think we just expected one or two of those to be at the top. That if I'm playing devil's advocate and trying to understand why people are upset about 300, that I think I can understand that. But I mean, it's like, gosh, you've got UFC 299, which is stacked. You've got UFC 300 the next month. And then you've got the International Fight Week card in June. And then, and then 2 pay-per-views in between. There's a lot of big things that need to happen. So I'm like still just like absolutely stoked for UFC 300. Most excited for that co-main. The other thing that I've seen from people is that they are basically just mad that it's a women's fight. They've said that. Like I've seen multiple people say like, other than the women's fight and the co-main, which of course like really upsets me and is terrible. Like, I'm like, dude, there are so many men's title fights that could be in that co-main event slot that will not be entertaining fights. Like the gender of the fighters has nothing to do with how good of a fight it'll be. And I think that fight will be exciting to say the least. But yeah, so I think other people are just kind of sexist, to be honest. That's my read. Which promotion do you think wins the mixed fight versus WLF co-promotion? Well, it is mixed fight versus JCK, but I was saying this earlier. I don't really know how to gauge how good these Armenian fighters are. Just looking at their records was the best that I could do. And we've had some decent fighters come out of Armenia. Is Arman Sarukian? Is he Armenian? I thought he was. Forgive me if I'm wrong on that. But yeah, let me just pull up this. I won't spend a ton of time on this, but let me just share this briefly with you. Let's just kind of size these guys up real quick. And with records, sometimes you never know. I mean, these are all over the place. This is really wacky. Look at this. This looks like a circus on paper. I have no idea what these matchmaking conversations were like, but Zhang Yuhe, if our record for him on Tapology is correct, which it very well could be missing fights, but he's fighting a 7-0 guy. Aping Shala fighting a 2-0. I think that is maybe a little more appropriate. Nartai Kazibai fighting this guy who is 0-0, but sometimes you have a guy who's 0-0 and he's got like this, he's got a 1-1 amateur record, which is a little weird. But maybe he's like amazing in some other combat sport. Then you've got Wutsa fighting here against a 3-2 guy, 5-0 against 9-3. That seems a little more equal. 8-1. That seems a little bit more well matched. But yeah, just some weird stuff going on here, and then a couple more fights to fill out the card. So I don't know. I wonder if these matchmakers got together and were just kind of like, okay, totally ignore records. How good is this guy? How good is that guy? Let's make the fight. Maybe that's how things went. So I have no idea how to gauge how good these guys are. Definitely, I think highly of Nartai Kazabai. Aping Shala, really good hands as well. Wutsa, I mean, you can see by his record, and Asur Bai, both guys that have done a lot. Really extensive records, over 40 fights. So I don't know. I really have no way to make an estimation on how this event's going to go, which makes it fun, right? Looking forward to it. So you asked that question against Cause when you read the question and answered, but it looked like you were confused, so I had to bring it up. No problem, man. Follow-up question. Now that you've seen Quinlan's career, how does it compare with some dude? Ray Borg he's had bad luck for years. And just like so many canceled fights back to back to back to back to back. Even when he left the UFC, he just could not catch a break. He, if you look at he's like an all-time great with weird Tapology record. He had, at one point, he had 6 canceled fights in a row. Weight problems in 4 fights. Even after after those 6 canceled fights, they tried to put him together with Brandon Moreno 3 times, and then lost, 2 wins, canceled fight, loss, 2 canceled fights, win, canceled fight, 2 wins, canceled fight. So yeah, it was even after he left the UFC. And then he fought for Eagle FC a couple times, which who knows what they're up to nowadays. His is the weirdest I've ever seen in terms of bad luck. And I mean, he missed weight sometimes too. What do I think of Henry Cejudo being paid less than Mackenzie Dern? Cejudo is one of the few that have won 2 belts in 2 divisions, and he's not being paid well. Created a persona. What else does he have to do to get paid? Good question. Mackenzie Dern has a huge following. She really has a huge following, and a lot of that has to do with your management as well. How much value do you bring to the promotion? How many eyes can you bring with you? I didn't really study those payouts. That is really interesting that Dern got paid more than Henry Cejudo, because I would think that Cejudo, in my eyes, would probably bring more people to the pay-per-view, and he was on the main card as well. I would just say props to Mackenzie Dern's management. I mean, they really got her a good deal. That is for sure. For sure. One Friday Fights live now. Well, actually, that's in like 12 hours, actually. Brings me to Paulo Costa being paid 65 and 65. Ooh, that is not great. At one of the most, Costa is being used like a star headlining fight night cards. He fought for a title. Why does the UFC treat the people they use as stars so badly? I mean, yeah, Costa, he has a big following. He was co-main event of a pay-per-view, been main event of pay-per-views before, main event of fight night cards before. 65 and 65. If that's actually, let me just pull that up real quick. And of course, you say all these things, and then Dana White's like, that's not what he paid. That's not what he earned. He got a lot more than that. These are on MMA Junkie. Really, 65 and 65? Andrea Lee got 70K for losing. Dang. I mean, yeah, you'll see like a lot of these payouts don't always make sense when you compare them to each other. Henry Cejudo got paid 150K losing to Merab Dvalishvili. McKendern got paid $200,000. Wow. Cejudo got paid 150K. Merab Dvalishvili, 210K. Ian Machado Gary, 110K, which I guess he's at 55 and 55. Paulo Costa made $250,000. So I remember there was a point in his career recently where he like really pushed to be paid more and signed a new contract. So that's honestly pretty good. Like if he were to win, I'm guessing if his win bonus is the same, then he would have made $500,000, which is pretty good. That's pretty good for someone outside of the main event, for sure. You said being paid 65 and 65. No, I mean I'm looking at MMA Junkie and they've got him at 250K. Some Naiza prospects to keep an eye on. Yeah, Tai Laka is one. Other than that, there wasn't a whole lot on the card that I was jumping out of my seat for. Let me just bring up that card real quick as well. Eliman Shurtayev and Bagdat Jubanish are both on the main card. Jubanish has looked decent so far. Most of the fighters on the card only have a few fights, and Bagdat Jubanish is 3-1, but he has looked pretty good, I think, recently. But he's fighting John Schenk, so I think that's a good test for him. But yeah, he would be the main guy, I would say, outside of the ones I already mentioned. Tai Laka is the big guy. What's my opinion on Kevin Iole? Oh gosh, I saw the analysts that make a joke of MMA go after him for covering Power Slap. Is he a shill? Is he a good journalist? Please tell me your opinion so I can use it. The thing is like if there's a media member or journalist that I just don't really connect to, a lot of times I don't read Kevin Iole's stuff. Like I'll see people post clips. It does seem like he has a very pro UFC and pro Dana White view. That is for certain. He, from what I've read, like very rarely criticizes the UFC. Not that you have to, but he has a very pro UFC side. And if like, I guess you're entitled to that opinion. And I honestly don't, I don't care if people cover Power Slap. I'm not saying that I've warmed up to Power Slap, but I think I'm just more like indifferent to it. Like, okay, whatever. Like, we watch a weird sport. There's a lot of weird things about sports. Power Slap is weird. I'm not into it. It doesn't interest me at all. But like, if other people like it, if other people want to cover it, that's on them, whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I don't want to just come on here and rail on people, but I always wonder like what, like as a media member, if you're trying to be a journalist, like what different thing are you bringing to the table? Or like, what are you really known for? And I guess I just don't know Kevin Iole's work enough to really know what he's known for. I mean, he had a lot of access to Dana White. more in like an interviewing sense, less than like I guess like a news breaking sense. I mean, there's a couple stories that he broke, but I don't know. I mean, I'll be honest, like I don't really include him in the circle of media members that I frequently lean on, but that doesn't mean that like everything he does is trash. If you like reading his work, I guess he writes opinions and columns. If you like reading that, that's up to you. But like personally, I haven't really connected with his work in that way. And yeah, definitely has a very pro UFC stance on things, which I think has rubbed a lot of people the wrong way for sure. Speaking of trying to make journalistic integrity better, what about Jack Slack, who posts clearly fake stuff, says it's fake, and media outlets like Sportspedia. I'm not familiar with Sportspedia. Reported as true, even though it's satire. Oh yeah. It's like, how clear do we have to make things? Like when we post things, maybe we just like, if we're the ones like reporting things, do we just have to make things so freaking clear what it is and what it isn't? Like literally, like every time Ariel Helwani says anything newsworthy, he has to follow it up with like 17 disclaimers of what he's not saying, because he knows that as soon as he says something, people are going to take it to the next level. He was like, I have a hunch that Francis Ngannou is going to fight the winner of Bader versus Fajeda on Saturday. Just a hunch. And then people are going to take that as like a news report, So he just has to like, is that the other side of things of like quality control, is just being so freaking clear about things to the point of exhaustion that there's no confusing what things are. Perhaps. How do you think Tailaka does against Puma? Apparently the Brazilian trains out of Dar team, which is in Kazakhstan, became a Kazakh citizen, turned Muslim and everything. They say he's good. Yeah, I didn't know that about him. I think Tailaka probably has to knock him out. I don't know how it's going to go. I don't really know much about Puma, but that's why I say that this could be a good test, because he's a veteran. He's got a lot more fights. He's got really solid grappling. Already fought in Naiza before. Like you said, lives in Kazakhstan. So this could be a tough test for Tailaka. I haven't seen, honestly, a whole lot of Tailaka's ground game, which I think gives me the most reservation about trying to predict the fight. But I think Tailaka probably needs to knock him out, which he very well could do. Puma is not a young guy, 37, 38 years old, something like that. So I think Tailaka has to knock him out, but I wouldn't be surprised if Puma gets the submission. Okay. I actually probably can only take a couple more, maybe even just one or two more before I have to head out. You take the sport seriously and professionally. I try. You can't always take everything too seriously, but I get your point. Is it wrong for analysts to make fun of MMA when you do such a good job at trying to be professional? I'm not sure if I'm wording that correctly. I think, no, I think you're right. I think that there is room for enjoying things, and when things are silly, pointing to point them out as such, or even enjoy them. There's a lot of things in MMA that are just like straight up silly. A lot of wacky fights, a lot of things like that, and I think that that's okay. I think making fun of fighters, there's a line between criticizing an athlete and making fun of them, that I think needs to be walked, and more on the side of critical rather than making fun. I think if you're getting into name calling, blatant, just like labeling, insulting intelligence, kind of just falling into the social media cesspool, I think that airs more on the making fun side of things, which I think you should avoid that as a professional. And you'll notice like I think a lot of the real professional people, like I think about Nolan King and Marcel Dorff. Every once in a while you'll see something critical, but it's not the norm out of them. And I've never seen them like outright just like make fun of a fighter. So I think I kind of try to look up to them in that sense. But I mean, if you're not a professional, then everything's fair game, right? Man, you were right, David. Notice there's a lot of people that care about Dern a lot in this. You are right. There are a lot of folks talking about Dern, and not that. And I appreciate all your comments. And by all means, if y'all want to read through those, feel free. I'm sorry, I'm skipping through past those Dern comments, but I want to get, since I did already cover Dern a little bit and I've covered her a lot in the past, I do want to maybe just touch on another question that I haven't got to today. Okay, you're clarifying that 65 and 65 was before his contract got renewed. Yeah, I mean, this is why I think having a really talented manager can really, really help. You can point out all the unevenness of fighters, what you think they should get paid versus what they do get paid. And then sometimes fighters that don't have as much skin in the game get paid a lot. I think a lot of that relates to management. I really do think it does. So last question for today about sports washing a while ago. Is it ever on the fighters to not accept fights in regions where they're purposefully sports washing? Absolutely. It totally is. I'm not saying it's as easy as just saying no, but just because, and I get it. Like if you're being offered a lot of money to go to Chechnya or Saudi Arabia, you're getting a really big opportunity, then I don't I don't look down on any of the fighters fighting in Saudi Arabia this weekend with PFL Bellator. I really don't. Like, I do think that there are some fighters who can compartmentalize it and just say, you know what, this is my job and it doesn't matter where I'm fighting. This is a big opportunity for me. This is how I make my money. I either don't have an opinion or I want to stay distant from all of the political stuff that's going on. Even though being a part of this event, there's different people that would feel different ways. Some people would say, even though I want to feel disconnected from politics or I don't approve of the politics in this area, I feel like being a part of this event is still supporting that. Some people may fall on that side. Other fighters may fall on the side of like, it doesn't matter what the politics are here. I'm a fighter. I'm here to get paid. I don't fault fighters for either way, but I think if they do feel strongly about not wanting to contribute to sports washing, I think they do. Yeah, they can say no. And I don't know if that's ever happened in the past. It's not really something you hear fighters themselves talk a whole lot about. And if I'm a fighter, like if I know like I can get in a lot of trouble for talking about this, I can understand why fighters would just want to keep their mouth shut and just stick to fighting. I can understand that, even though I may have a different, like I may see things differently. But yeah, I mean, I think, that's one reason why I don't cover ACA, even though every once in a while there'll be Cossack fighters that fight for ACA. I don't cover them because I don't want to do anything that would allow the influence of this organization and in particular of this individual that is behind the organization and his comrades. I don't want to do anything that would expand their influence or try to cover over some of the atrocities that they've committed. But that's my personal perspective on things. And I've often asked myself if someone were to give me, $50,000 a year to cover ACA events and make a trip out there once a year to interview Kazakh fighters and cover it, would I do it? I have to ask myself those questions and really wrestle through them and think through like why, what are really my convictions behind that. And today I tell myself no. And I'd like to think I'd stick by that if I ever got some kind of lucrative opportunity. But yeah, it's like, okay, if JCK decides to co-promote with ACA and they're going to Chechnya, am I going to cover it? Those are questions I have to ask myself right now and think through all of my reasonings and ethics behind that. And, every situation may be a little bit different, but that's kind of where I fall on things. All right. Really appreciate all the comments and even the ones I didn't get to today. Sorry I wasn't able to get to those, but I do have something here in about 30 minutes that I've got to run to. So appreciate all of you, and tune in next week. Enjoy JCK mixed fight this weekend. Enjoy RIZIN, this sick UFC card. I'm going to be doing Tapology live results for the UFC Mexico City card. If you haven't, check out my newest video over Road to UFC Season 3. And until the next time, enjoy the fights.